under the initiative of Walk Icons. It's a pleasure to have Dr. Ruchika Sharma with us. She is an authority on gender and women's studies. And today we are exploring a wonderful topic which excites everybody, especially when it's all about courtesans, shingar, nautch girls. It's great to have you with us today. And this is our second conversation. It will be great to have some insights from you that what inspired you to start on women and gender studies and then get at a micro view on Shinghar, courtesans, and linking that to further Nautch girls.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's great to interact with you and through you to all the history enthusiasts who are here today. I think this journey for me to work on courtesans began when I was a child and began doing Kathak. And when you are doing the Kathak dance, you're supposed to explore the history. And within that exploration, you would get to know about the role that courtesans have played. The second aspect was when I was doing my master's, and very shortly I did a research paper on Tawayavs. My supervisor, Professor Harbans Mukhya, sort of encouraged me to look at the history of Ganikas as a theme and not just at one period. And I remember those are the years that movies like Moola Rouge had come, and it got me so fascinated to have these women who were not just style icons and not just in India but other cultures also, who were style icons. They were the experts in music, in dance. People would sort of wait to get a glimpse of these women. And so movies like Umrao Jaan, the one in the 1980s, I think these are the things that got me researching. So I can safely say from 2003, this sort of fascination for courtesans began with me in research, and it hasn't stopped ever since, Yeah.
And how do you see this courtesans as a part of cultural expression? Because nowadays we see a lot of travelers, visitors to India are exploring this topic, and they would like to understand the genealogy, the context of courtesans from ancient India till date. If you can throw some light on this.
Yes, I think in the ancient period, you have references to what we know as ganikas, right? And ganikas are women who are artists. These are women who have the proficiency in the art forms. So 64 kala jinko hum bolte hain, 64 art forms. And one would wonder, what are these 64 art forms? I mean, you would think of music, dance, playing musical instruments. Uske alawa aur kya? These women will have proficiency in things like painting, in making potions. They could speak to animals. They could also do codes. And this will tell you that Kanikas from the early India time onwards, they actually had a role to play. They could spy for the state. They could get information. They could, and it also tells us that these roles are not just in art cultural spaces. They were the ones who would read. They were the ones who would write poetry. They were writing text. In fact, these were women who were extremely educated. So when you read the history of Ganikas in the early Indian period, they have references in Sanskrit Kavya, Sanskrit literature, the entire text of Mritchakatikam, which talks about, and when you read the text, you see this, and there's a beautiful movie called Utsav on the film where Rekha plays Vasant Sena. If you look at the jewelry, and this is something that we've already been discussing, this jewelry becomes the property of women, because women could not own property in any other way but jewelry. So these are actually tremendously rich women. They are not just rich women, they're fashion icons. They start these trends, and everybody then, of course, would have to follow the trends started by these women. And they were the women who would create art, create poetry, recite these, and only the urban elite men will have access to these women in the early or ancient India. And so much of literature is filled with the fact that women like Amrapali are mentioned, right? And we realize that so much historical, literary, even films have been fascinated because the way in which Ganika has been mentioned, the curiosity is, why are women who are public performers, what is so special about them? That is because other cultures may have had concepts like geisha in Japan, for example, but the cultural space that Ganika carried, so much so that the ruler or the nobility will want to have access to her. She knew things that others may not have had access to.
Yeah.
And it also fascinates me that how early on their training may have started.
Yeah.
You know, they must have begun to get training when they were 4 5 years old.
Yeah.
And to have all these 64 arts that made each of the women, an expert in their own way. It might be possible that somebody may have expertise in one art form more than the other,
Yeah.
but the fact that they have an independent space, they live there, they culturally create. And I think I would also want to sort of highlight there are a lot of cultural forms and art forms that we are following. It actually might have been passed on to us because women like these have continued and preserved
Yeah.
by their knowledge keeping skills along with artistic
No,
skills.
thank you for the insight. I think it's very, very exciting. But how do you link Shingar to politics? And at that time also, there was socio-cultural history, and politics played a larger role. I mean, what is your thought line around it?
I think Shringar, if you think about it, is not just an appearance; it's also resources,
Yeah.
right? To have a Shringar, I mean, mostly if you look at the Pahadi paintings of 18th, 19th century, you'll always have the Naika with the Sakhi.
Okay.
Right, the Sakhi. Now it also shows the Naika who's being portrayed will have a certain kind of socioeconomic background,
Yeah.
and a certain kind of advantage of being the position she's at, and the control over resources then becomes a way in which the Naika will have all these objects which will be passed on. So the way in which the entire household of Naika works, they will also have, because they celebrated once the daughter was born because she'll carry forward. So in a way, it's also a parallel to patriarchy,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
The way son's birth will be celebrated in another kind of domestic household. Here, the birth of son is something that doesn't excite. What will he do in a courtesan's sort of entire establishment? But the birth of daughter will mean that she'll carry forward the line.
Wow.
She'll carry forward everything. But what you do find is that kings are as fascinated
Yeah.
by the Ganikas, by the courtesan, as is anybody else, right? So the rulers as their clientele, the rulers as people who would be their admirers, also their sponsors.
Yeah.
They'll be the ones who would be perhaps the biggest sponsors, right? They had the resources. So I think one has to see this kind of a connect, between the political structure and the Ganika. In fact, if I may mention, in the Arthashastra, they are actually mentioned as the highest taxpayers because they have the resources.
Yes.
And how non-judgmental is the society that, they are seen for their roles that they play in the society, unlike, other cultures perhaps.
Yeah. And having said that, now between courts and courtesans, what was the deep linkage which everybody liked to explore? Because the word court and courtesans, they sound similar to certain extent, and there is again a lot of stories around there. So what is your thought?
I think, if I can take a historical jump and come to the 18th century, a very famous book called Murakkai-Dilli was composed. And I sometimes find it very sad that people pick up one story from Murakkai-Dilli and tell it without giving the historical context. Maybe the historian in me gets really hurt by that. So Murakkai-Dilli talks about these courtesans in Delhi in the 18th century. The book is written by a traveler who comes from Hyderabad to Delhi and is amazed. Now, the courtesans one of these women will come out on an elephant. Now, traveling on an elephant is a honor reserved for royalty and nobility, right? But you have a courtesan who will come on an elephant. They have the resources. Similarly, if you come to Lucknow, the Awadh Lucknow region, you realize that the nobility will send their sons to learn tehzeeb, to learn the polite manners के एक महफिल में अगर आप बैठे हैं या सबके साथ आप बातचीत कर रहे हैं, कैसे बर्ताव करेंगे, कैसे हाथ रखेंगे आप. कहाँ देखना है, किसी की शायरी खत्म होने के बाद क्या बोलना है, कैसे उनको दाद देनी है, या कैसे जो भी आप एक फॉर्मल कोर्टली माहौल का जो तरीका है विच इज़ वेरी फॉर्मलाइज्ड. हम लोग बहुत ही मॉडर्न वर्ल्ड में रहते हैं, बट मिडिवल वर्ल्ड इज वेरी हायरार्किकल. एंड हाउ डू यू थिंक दैट दीज मेन विल लर्न दीज थिंग्स फ्रॉम द कोर्टिजान्स? सो नवाबों के बच्चे भी जा करके इन कोर्टिजान से वो तमीज तहजीब सीख करके आते हैं.
Then what led to their decline? Because this is a curious question out there. What led to the decline of courtesans? And what are the misconceptions which we see today? Because there are many thought lines around it.
आई थिंक हम लोग जब हिस्ट्री को 2 मिनट की मैगी नूडल बना देते हैं ना, तो यही हो जाता है. जबकि हिस्ट्री इज लाइक अ निहारी विच हैज टू बी कुक्ड द एंटायर नाइट, राइट? आपको वक्त देना पड़ता है, हिस्ट्री को कंटेक्चुअलाइज करना पड़ता है. एक कहानी को अगर आप ऐसे ही सुना देंगे बिना उसके आसपास का उसको ग्राउंडेड किए, आपको समझ ही नहीं आएगा कि ये एकदम से हो क्या गया. आई डोंट थिंक कोर्टिजान्स एवर एक्चुअली डिक्लाइन. बदलते समय के साथ में कोर्टिजान्स का सोशल रोल बदल जाता है. कुछ बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग काम है बंगाल पर फॉर एग्जांपल, जहाँ पर ये बात होती है कि जिस तरह से कोर्टिजान्स दिल्ली से लखनऊ जाती हैं, उसके बाद लखनऊ से दे स्टार्ट मूविंग टू कैलकाटा, right? Because that's where now the Britishers are, that's where the clientele is. कि establishment जब कलकत्ता में होती है, so entire group of these women are there. But you also realize that the European men may not have that kind of cultural understanding. Although you do have, in fact, I must mention this, जो आपने बोला नॉच women के बारे में, नॉच women as a theme, कोई भी European traveler अगर इंडिया पर लिख रहा है तो वो नॉच परफॉर्मेंस उसने देखा होगा, अगर देखा नहीं होगा तो सुना होगा और जिक्र जरूर किया होगा.
But for our viewers, if you can deep dive between the difference between courtesan and notch girl, because this is again has a very thin line, blurred line, what we understand, from historian perspective, from layman perspective, and for a traveler who is visiting India, how he or she should perceive these two different categories.
I will start by telling you that every historian starts as a layperson who loves history, right? But then you dedicate your life to it.
Yes.
So the interest जो एक historian का है वो start तो ऐसे ही होता है, right? But courtesan और एक तवायफ में या courtesan and ganika, when we compare them to notch women, एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग जो सिमिलैरिटी है वो ये, दे बोथ आर्टिस्ट्स. दे बोथ sort of devote and dedicate their lives to the art forms. They have their riyaz, they practice, they have a sort of group of musicians, somebody who sings for them. ये कॉमन रहेगा दोनों के बीच में, एक डेडिकेटेड लाइफ टू आर्ट फॉर्म. फर्क ये हो जाता है कि द वे तवायफ will have an establishment. She has a house, she has an entire beautiful, because she has to attract people to come to her place. The palace or the place, the mansion she lives in is an extension of her body. She can't be decorated and the place be shabby, right? It has to be as beautiful as the mehfil she's promising people to have. Now, Notch girl may not have those facilities, because also remember, Notch girls are going from one house to the other. These courtesans wouldn't, unless a Nawab or somebody would invite them. And even there, they'll be invited with so much of respect and regard that the courtesans will go. But Notch girls will not have that kind of an establishment and resources, unless and until they do belong to a kind of a gharana or a kind of a family. So most of the images of Notch girls that you see will be at a function or at a wedding or at a jalsa organized by some nobility, some raja, some zamindar, and by the 18th, 19th century also the British men. Because British men want to behave like the Indian elite. So they start organizing these mehfils where they invite these Notch women. So they may not understand, and this is something maybe we should talk about it another day, and some of these stories कि क्या interaction होता है between the white men and the Notch women, but they are fascinated by them. चाहे उनको उस ठुमरी का बोल समझ में आए चाहे नहीं, चाहे जो वो छोटा ख्याल गा रही हैं, वो घुंघरू जो पहनती हैं, they are fascinated कि ये bells क्या होती हैं, right? They'll write about it, but they might not know कौन से राग में अपनी प्रस्तुति कर रही हैं, but they are fascinated by it because they do realize something very special about these women. Also अपने culture से देखा नहीं ना, for them it's also a cultural novelty. They are amazed by it,
Yes, absolutely, because ये भी एक तरह का art form है. And in art form there's a lot of cinema, there is a lot of theater.
Yes.
And you are a theater artist yourself. There's a lot that has been done, but the recent bit is very interesting, that is on Shingar and Courtesans, is all about Hiramandi.
Oh yeah.
The thought line of how beautification or how it was depicted, the story behind it, if you can just share with us, it will be great.
I think Hiramandi's success lies in the fact that a lot of facets about the Tawayafs are mentioned in that, their role in 1857. And I think it kept reminding me of one of the sort of doyens of Indian history on 1857, which is Veena Talwar Oldenburg. उन्होंने actually interview किया था the descendants of जो लखनऊ की कोर्टेजान्स की फैमिली की औरतें थी, उन लोगों को. And you realize that they were in Hiramandi were able to show certain bits and pieces, क्योंकि देखिए हर आर्ट फॉर्म की अपनी कंपल्शंस होती हैं, सिनेमा की अपनी कंपल्शंस हैं, राइट? बट आई स्टिल पर्सनली फील एज अ हिस्टोरियन, एज अ डांसर एंड अ थिएटर पर्सन, नथिंग बीट्स पाकीज़ा एंड रेखा वाली उमराव जान, right? Because Pakiza does sort of talk about the aesthetic and the visualization of that aesthetic. And what Umrao Jan of Rekha, I've not seen the other one, I'm sorry. What Umrao Jan of Rekha does is that एक 19th century की किताब जो मिर्ज़ा हादी रुतफ़ा ने लिखी थी और उसको फिर अनुवाद किया गया, it brings sort of in front of us how that 19th century courtesan and her role, and also that kind of dilemma of that between love and your profession. Your courtesan, being a courtesan is a profession, right? You have to sort of earn money, and I will maybe sometime talk about Kama Sutra and what Kama Sutra talks about courtesans, but your job is to earn money. You can't fall in love, right? And that's what we see in both Pakiza and in Umrao Jan. Hiramandi does that for me, but I found Hiramandi's sensibilities very 21st century, perhaps. Maybe it's an artistic compulsion, perhaps. Of course, certain bits and certain pieces, like the walk of Aditi Rao in the film, were really beautifully thought about, and also shows that to be a filmmaker on something as beautiful as courtesans, you have to know these details. But I feel that as a medium, if cinema in not in 1920s or 30s or 50s or 40s, but even in 2023 and 24 is still discussing courtesans, how much is our fascination with them, right? You can't let go of that. So अगर आप पहले से देखेंगे, बहुत से नॉवेल्स लिखे जाते रहे हैं, बहुत सी कहानियाँ कही जाती रही हैं, बट एक इतिहासकार का काम फिर यहाँ पर ये हो जाता है कि हम आपको उसमें से जो इतिहास है उसको समय के हिसाब से बताएं, right? When I tell you about Umrao Jan, and if I tell you about Vasant Sena, I can't put them in a same bracket. They may have belonged to a similar category of women who are artists par excellence, but ancient India, medieval, early modern, इन सब के अपने अपने वक्तों की कुछ compulsions रहे हैं. So we need to highlight those as well.
So thank you for a great insight. But I will link this question now to another question. Delhi has been city of cities. So if you can just give us some perspective on courtesans, not girls, by city.
So oftentimes when you, the more detailed description of cities that you find is more there when the European travelers are traveling, right? Because they will tell us about कि वो painting कहाँ बनाया गया या वो कहाँ पर describe कर रहे हैं, कहाँ लिखा गया. But you do realize that courtesans as artists are there in all elite spaces. They are, in fact, if I can say, in the history of materiality, they are actually the status symbols. Also because their art form is, so let me tell you this very interesting story of, because these courtesans are also competing with each other. So in the Murakkai Delhi of 18th century, mid 18th century Delhi, नादिर शाह के invasion के कुछ समय के बाद दिल्ली में ऐसा लगता ही नहीं कभी invasion हुआ है, because Delhi always bounces back, right? There are courtesans who are competing with each other. So एक अगर हाथी पे आती हैं तो दूसरी जो है वो पूरी बॉडी पेंट करवा करके निकलती हैं. And it's of course controversial. Imagine
Yeah.
18th century में a woman courtesan, but people are fascinated by it, and she gains popularity again.
Yeah.
So they're also competing with each other by doing these tactics. Somebody is very famous for her voice. Somebody is very famous for a particular dance form that she does. Somebody is famous because two people queue up, the nobles queue up to meet her. राइट एंड आप तो सिर्फ शहरों की बात हम कर रहे हैं. आई विल वांट टू मेंशन अ स्टोरी ऑफ अ फ्रेंच कोर्टेसान व्हिच इज मेंशन्ड इन द very early 20th century, where the courtesan keeps getting, this is a French courtesan, keeps getting offered to meet a son of a royal nobility, actually aristocracy. She refuses, and he keeps requesting her, because see, that's the stature that you cannot forcefully meet her. She will give you time, right? So she tells him at some point, pareshan hokar ke, that you bring all the money and I'll meet you. He brings the money. She says, now put your money to, like, put fire to your money. As long as that fire is burning, I'm all yours. Now he puts that money on fire, but he's so worried that how much time I have to spend with her. He keeps looking at the fire again and again, rather than actually spending time with her. How clever is she that she's able to not give him time, but at the same time not get him angry because he's a member of aristocracy.
Yeah.
So this is the cleverness. This is the sort of a sense of humor, the kind of power and the kind of popularity the courtesans will have all over the world.
Another keyword that we have been listening from visitors while they are, because this is a special interest topic, and is the word mujra. Yeah, and there's a decent connotation to this word also, definitely, and there are other kinds of meanings also. What is your thought line as a historian, and how should one perceive this word when talking about the topic or leading a particular walk or an experience or a storytelling session from history standpoint?
I think I really want to sort of also challenge this idea of respectable space. What makes a space respectable, and why should we associate respect or disrespect with women's bodies? If mujra is a space where people come to see a woman perform, it's her body which is at display, right? Whether they've come here to hear her sing, or hear her sort of recite a poem, or see her dance, you realize that her art form is emerging from her body. अगर वो गाना गा रही है, या वो अभिनय कर रही है, या डांस कर रही है, her body becomes the central part of that. So maybe we need to historicize these women with taking away the idea of respect from their bodies, because respect कई बार बहुत judgmental word हो जाता है, right? अक्सर हम सोचते हैं कि मुद्रा, yes, I know we do understand that mudra can have this whole idea of vulgar, but what makes something vulgar? If the artist is performing what the audience is asking for, so vulgarity lies with whom? With the performer or with the viewer?
Yes.
So perhaps mudra is a space where a particular art form is prepared. कौन सा गाना गाया जाएगा, कौन सा राग परफॉर्म किया जाएगा, कितने संगीतकार बैठेंगे, कौन गाना गाने वाला है. I think all those aspects do make mudra, what it is.
Okay.
So really, I mean, as a historian, I really want to take out the idea of respect.
So in your view, what should a walking tour company, or a travel company, or a historian, or a researcher, or a student should consider while exploring Delhi on this topic?
I think first thing we need to do is we need to stop trying to save characters from history. We need to stop victimizing them, and we need to stop making them into heroes and heroines. They were as common people with as aspirational lifestyles, with as much being good and bad as we right now
Entrepreneurial
are.
lifestyles, or
Everything.
Yeah?
I'm sure they were as entrepreneurial. If they're competing with each other, that one is traveling on elephant and one is dressing up only in body paint, such a controversial thing, just to get attention. I remember in the 1990s, and a Bollywood actress did that, and somebody put a case on her or something. And when I read this story, I was like, oh, ये तो 19th century से पहले ही हो चुका है. You know, an Indian courtesan has already done this, right? So you do realize that these are women who are as much a part of the political times they're living in. They're as much part of economy and society they're living in. And maybe they were judged and they were okay with it. Because किसी के जज करने से तो किसी का प्रोफेशन नहीं रुका.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe when we talk about them as historians, as walk leaders, as students, as researchers, as a travel company that wants to tell people about experiencing a city, we need to not romanticize them. We need to not make them into victims. बेचारे कोई बेचारा नहीं होता. और by that logic हर कोई बेचारा होता है, right? So maybe we need to look at them as complex people. जिनके साथ वही दिक्कतें समस्याएं रही होंगी, right? Learning problems. Like I always keep thinking that if they were singing so beautifully, does it mean they cannot eat every food they want to? They were constantly working on their bodies, right? The body should look perfect and ideal, and they should not age faster because that's their profession, right? So they must have had so much, of these. There's this novel and a movie called Memoirs of a Geisha on Japan. वहाँ पर एक aging courtesan वाला conversation आता है.
Okay.
Right? And you realize aging is their insecurity because after a certain age, they cannot, perform because it becomes difficult to sort of, do that. So you realize that उनकी भी दिक्कतें समस्याएं शायद वही रही होंगी. But one of my problems is when people start working on courtesans, तो या तो उनको वो romanticize कर देते हैं और या उनको विक्टिमाइज कर देते हैं. और दोनों ही जो बाइनरीज हैं वो दिक्कत वाली हैं, क्योंकि हम लोग एक हिस्टोरिकल एजेंट जो हैं, जो औरतें अपनी किस्मत अपने हाथ में रखती हैं, पैसा भी अपने हाथ में रखती हैं, हम उनको दोनों ही चीज़ नहीं कर सकते हैं. Right? It's a disfavor to history. It's a disfavor to the character of courtesan which we are studying.
No, absolutely. And this brings me back to the narratives. I mean, as a historian, what is the correct narrative, and who is a historian?
Yeah, this is actually a more recent debate that's been going on about popular history and academic history. I think maybe all to say is that अगर मुझे अपने दांत का इलाज कराना है तो I will not go to a cardiologist. So maybe अगर आपको history जाननी है तो perhaps go to a historian. So why this kind of a disregard for historical specialization?
From your perspective,
I think anybody and everybody can love history. History सबकी साझी होती है. ये हमारा ही तो इतिहास है. हमारी ही sort of ancestors have been living through this. We are studying them. But the historical narrative को जब तक आप उस समय के अनुसार नहीं समझेंगे, what will happen is that you will then get 2 minutes Maggie. You will not get the entire picture.
But historian तो समझाते हैं ना, समझ के समझाते हैं. बट उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आप किसको हिस्टोरियन बोलेंगे?
हाँ, आई थिंक ये एक अच्छा सवाल है, क्योंकि बहुत लोग जो पॉपुलर हिस्टोरियंस हैं, कहने को तो देखा जाए तो वो लोग भी बहुत समय तो खर्च करते हैं, राइट? वो बहुत लंबे समय तक रिसर्च करते हैं, अपने रिसोर्सेज को जानते हैं, अपनी आर्काइव समझते हैं, अपने मॉन्यूमेंट्स को समझते हैं. लेकिन उसके साथ साथ शायद ज़रूरी है कि जो एक्सपर्टीज़ है उसको साथ में लेकर चला जाए. बिकॉज अगर एक चीज़ को देखने का नया नज़रिया emerge करता है तो शायद a historian will be the first person to talk about that. He'll be the first person to sort of bring your attention to that कि अरे इसके साथ समझ के देखिए ना, हाँ, कि अगर आपको सोने के साथ सुहागा भी मिल जाए, हाँ, या कड़ी के साथ चावल भी मिल जाए, तो maybe the idea is that to bring things together in the right proportion, to bring things together without always sensationalizing them. Right? So maybe शायद इतिहासकार के लिए इतिहास की जो एक सैंक्टिटी है, हम हमेशा इतिहास में जाकर के शायद सच नहीं जानना चाह रहे होते हैं. और ये भी सवाल है कि क्या हम इतिहास में सच जान सकते हैं, किस कोर्टेसान ने क्या चीज़ करी होगी, उसने वो क्यों कहा होगा, राइट? लेकिन हम एक इतिहासकार के रूप में ये ज़रूर कर सकते हैं कि जब हम कोर्टेसान को समझें या पढ़ें, वी नो विच एरा शी बिलोंग टू. इफ शी इज़ परफॉर्मिंग समथिंग, व्हाट इज़ द कॉन्टेक्स्ट फॉर दैट? क्या वो वही ठुमरी अपने इंडियन ऑडियंस के लिए परफॉर्म करती है जो अपने ब्रिटिश ऑडियंस के लिए परफॉर्म करती है, राइट? या उसको ब्रिटिश ऑडियंस और एक हिंदुस्तानी ज़मींदार अगर देख रहा है तो क्या फ़र्क है उनकी गेज़ में। अगर आप ये जानेंगे तो शायद इतिहास का हर पहलू आप जान पाएंगे। ऑफ कोर्स अगर हिस्ट्री को सेंसेशनलाइज करके देखना है वो बहुत आसान होता है, लेकिन शायद उसको एक तरह से उसका रिस्पेक्ट करते हुए, रिस्पेक्ट आई डोंट मीन मॉरल रिस्पेक्ट, बट मे बी वांटिंग टू नो हिस्ट्री कि शायद दिस इज द क्लोजेस्ट टू हाउ इट हैपेंड। आई थिंक दैट इज समथिंग वी नीड टू ट्रस्ट हिस्टोरियंस, that maybe they will be able to give you political, economic, social, cultural, religious, all dimensions of it. और तभी आप शायद चीज़ों को अपने एक टोटलिटी में जान पाएंगे, संपूर्णता में जान पाएंगे। अदरवाइज एक वो ऐसे करके जो चलते हैं ना घोड़े के आसपास, बड़ा आसान होता है शायद, बट मे बी फॉर अ हिस्टोरियन ये पर्पस नहीं होता है। फॉर अ हिस्टोरियन हिस्ट्री में जो दिलचस्पी है या जो हिस्ट्री को बाकी लोगों तक पहुंचाने का एक जज्बा है हिस्टोरियंस में, शायद हिस्टोरियंस क्योंकि आई मीन एज टीचर्स, एज प्रोफेसर्स, एज राइटर्स, हमारा फोकस शायद वहाँ रहता है। मे बी हमें भी टाइम चाहिए कि हम भी व्हाट्सएप पे लिखें, या टाइम चाहिए कि हम भी शायद यूट्यूब चैनल्स पर आएँ और शायद बताएं कि हिस्ट्री को अगर आप पीएचडी नहीं कर सकते हैं तो कम से कम उसको आप पढ़ें, उसको आप जानें, उस पर आप उस मॉन्यूमेंट तक ट्रैवल करके आएँ, उसको छोड़ ना दें, राइट। तो मे बी शायद जितने भी लोग इतिहास से जुड़े हुए हैं, चाहे वो ट्रैवलर्स हैं, चाहे वो आम जनता है, चाहे पॉपुलर हिस्टोरियंस हैं, चाहे एकेडमिक हिस्टोरियंस हैं, चाहे पीपल लाइक मी हु डू ट्राई टू इंटरैक्ट विद कॉमन पीपल, सभी का अटेम्प्ट तो एक है, वी ऑल लव हिस्ट्री, but we do not want to sensationalize history. हम में से कोई भी ये नहीं चाहेगा.
No, very nice. Yeah. I think that should be the ethical value
Yes.
to talk about past in a most relevant context. Now this brings us back to your writings, which I mean I've been reading quite a bit. So थोड़ा सा अपनी बुक्स के बारे में आप बताइए जो आप लिख रहे हैं, लिख चुके हैं और आगे लिखने वाले हैं.
अच्छा, लिखने वाले तो साउंड वेरी विशफुल थिंकिंग. आई हैव बीन राइटिंग एकेडमिक एज वेल एज इन द न्यूज़पेपर्स एक्सेट्रा, बिकॉज मैं हमेशा से सोचती आई हूँ कि एक हिस्टोरियन एज अ टीचर अपनी बात को समझा पाने का ओनस मुझ पर है. अगर मैं अपनी बात को सिंपल से तरीके से आम जनता तक या अपने स्टूडेंट्स तक नहीं पहुंचा सकती हूँ, विच मीन्स आई नीड टू वर्क ऑन माई स्पीकिंग एंड verbal skills. So I have been working on Notch women a lot. और उस Notch women के साथ साथ of course you want to go back and talk about तवायफ्स, गनिकास. कुछ अखबारों में आर्टिकल्स हैं मेरे गनिकास एंड तवायफ्स पर. उसके साथ साथ I also work on the European presence in India and also on the fact कि क्या जो wills हैं, जो legal documents हैं of Britishers, जिसमें वो अपनी families जो इंडिया में हैं उनकी बात करते हैं, जो इंडियन औरतें उनकी लिव इन पार्टनर्स हैं, मैरिड पार्टनर्स हैं, जिनके साथ उनके मिक्स्ड रेस चिल्ड्रन हैं, उनकी बात करते हैं. तो उन विल्स को जान करके क्या हम उन इंडियन औरतों का इतिहास लिख सकते हैं या नहीं.
So after these books and your literary works and the researches that you're doing, if somebody would like to connect with you on social media, how can they search you? Because when I tried doing it, I got confused between couple of profiles.
Actually, I must say that I'm a little scared of social media because I share my name with somebody who's much junior from me, but since she has same name as me and she has studied in the same educational institution, I often get a lot of messages assuming it is her. I take it as a compliment because it shows I'm 10 years younger. I don't look my age, right? Because somebody who's 10 years my younger, people are confusing me with her. मैं अपनी उम्र से कम छोटी लगती हूँ, बहुत अच्छी बात है. लेकिन उसका फ्लिप साइड ये होता है कि मेरी इस रिसर्च, मेरा जो 2001 से मैंने एमए शुरू किया था, 2005 से मैंने रिसर्च करके 2022 में जो किताब छापी है जिसमें 17 साल का मेरा रिसर्च है, आई डोंट वांट दैट टू गेट लॉस्ट. क्योंकि यहाँ पे अब हम लोग 7 मिनट की रील बनाते हैं और 17 साल की रिसर्च. बहुत पापड़ बेले हैं, बहुत धक्के खाए हैं, छाले पड़े हैं पैरों में. कलकत्ता से लंदन एंड दिल्ली आर्काइव्स एंड हाई कोर्ट कोलकाता जाकर के मटेरियल ढूंढ कर रिसर्च की है. सो आई थिंक व्हाट आई वांट टू से इज आई एम नॉट ऑन यूट्यूब. I don't have any YouTube profiles. I have a profile on academia.edu, following the sort of my professors from both St. Stephen's College, JNU, and some of my very respectable colleagues from Delhi University and Jamia. मेरी लगभग सारी research, other than the book for copyright reasons, it is there on my academia profile. People can download and read my articles, my newspaper clippings, मेरे videos, जो मैं ये वाला video का भी link of course I will share, and other video talks where I've spoken to other university professors and other international platforms, but everything is academic.
No, very nice. I think this clarifies the audience how they can approach you. And certainly, we will be soon announcing our podcast on Walk Icons, and also Guftugu session with Dr. Sharma, which will be coming soon, will be announced soon. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much for being there for us to lead this.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to link with everybody, because history sabki hai, right?
Thank
It's
you.
just that one really enjoys this kind of a space and this kind of an audience जहाँ हर history को प्यार करने वाला इंसान आकर के history की बात कर सकता है.
Thank you very much.